Welcome to the news report for day 434 of the war in Ukraine. This is the account. Thank you for tuning in. Today I have 4 extra news segments. The first regarding the World Press Freedom Day, the second regarding the latest Russian UAV attack on Ukraine, the third on the curious incident involving a UAV and an explosion at the Kremlin, and the fourth is about President Zelensky's visit to European countries. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. Before we start the news though, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Russian forces are trying to push through defensive lines between Bodanivka and Khomove, roughly along the 0506 road, in order to advance on Chasiv Yar. There are unverified reports that Ukraine managed to recapture the Bakhmut Medical College and some areas near the MiG-17 monument in yesterday's reported counteroffensives. Avdiivka. More pro-Russian channels have claimed and somewhat confirmed that Russia has been pushed out of the area between Troitske and New York. And to start the news segment, the latest updates on the World Press Freedom Day from Ukraine. Today is the 30th anniversary of World Press Freedom Day. Ukraine rose from 106th to 79th place in the 2023 World Press Freedom Index, published by Reporters Without Borders. This is due to the economic stabilization of most of the media and a reduction of the influence of oligarchs. The US ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink, held a meeting with representatives of independent Ukrainian media outlets, such as the Kyiv Independent, Ukrainska Pravda, Suspilne, Slidstvo Info, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's investigative program schemes, as well as Oksana Romaniuk, the head of the Institute of Mass Information. Asami Terajima, the Kyiv Independent's reporter, won the 2023 George Weidenfeld Prize. It is awarded annually for excellent investigative and courageous research activities as part of the prestigious German Axel Springer Prize. And now for the updates on the latest Russian UAV attack. During the night, Russia launched a UAV attack on Ukraine. The Ukrainian Defense Forces shot down 21 of the 26 Iranian-made Shahed 136-131 drones. In Mykolaiv Oblast, 1 drone was intercepted and 1 hit a target. An administrative building in the city of Dnipro has been damaged as well. Additionally, in the city of Kropivnitsky, Kirovohrad Oblast, 3 drones attacked an oil depot. There was no damage reported yet. Over Kyiv, all targets were intercepted. Now for the updates on the curious incident involving a UAV and the explosion at the Kremlin. Last night, rather spectacular footage was shared on social media. The videos show an unknown drone exploding over the Kremlin. The Kremlin called the drone strike a terrorist attack. No injuries were reported. The chairman of the People's Council of the DPR, Vladimir Bidevka, stated that this attack confirms that Zelensky is a terrorist, and military analyst Igor Korotchenko, editor-in-chief of National Defense magazine, stated that only President Zelensky could have ordered a drone attack like this. Russian President Vladimir Putin was not injured in the attack, as he was not at the Kremlin at the time, the Kremlin's press service reported. Mikhail Sheremet, the so-called State Duma deputy for Crimea, has called for a missile strike on the residence of Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, while Dmitry Medvedev, deputy secretary of Russia's Security Council, called for the elimination of President Zelensky and his government. President Volodymyr Zelensky has emphasized that Ukraine is at war on its own territory and is defending itself against Russia. He stated, "We are not attacking either Putin or Moscow. We are fighting on our own territory, defending our villages and towns. We don't have enough weapons to do that. That's why we didn't attack Putin. We leave that to the tribunal." In a press briefing, Karine Jean-Pierre, the spokeswoman of the White House, said that the United States could not yet confirm the credibility of reports of a drone attack on the Kremlin. US Senator Mark Warner, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, told reporters that there's no evidence that Ukraine is behind the alleged drone attack. Anton Gerashchenko pointed to an interesting detail in one of the videos. People can be seen on the roof of the Kremlin right before the explosion. And finally, the updates on President Zelensky's visit to European countries. President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Finland for a one-day summit with leaders of the Nordic countries. Zelensky is expected to discuss ongoing support for Ukraine with 4 ministers at the presidential palace in Helsinki. Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, Norway's Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, and Iceland's Prime Minister Katrín Jakobsdóttir are all in attendance. At a joint press conference, Finnish President Sauli Niinistö explained that Finland cannot give Ukraine Hornet fighter jets until it receives replacements, and also announced the preparation of a 15th military aid package. Following the summit in Helsinki, the leaders of Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Ukraine, Finland, and Sweden issued a joint statement in which they supported Ukraine's European and Euro-Atlantic integration. After the summit in Helsinki, President Volodymyr Zelensky headed to the Netherlands, arriving in Schiphol around 10 p.m. Zelensky is expected to give a speech in The Hague titled "No Peace Without Justice" and visit the International Criminal Court, and after meet with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte. According to a leak, President Volodymyr Zelensky also intended to visit Berlin on May 13th at the invitation of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. However, after the details were leaked to the media and the resulting security breach, Zelensky may cancel his visit. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. Russian troops massively shelled settlements across Kherson Oblast and the regional capital, killing 23 civilians and injuring 46. A railway station and a crossing. A house, a hardware store, a grocery market, a gas station. What unites these places? The bloody trail that Russia leaves with its shells, killing civilians in Kherson and Kherson Oblast, Zelensky wrote on Telegram. Zelensky's posts include pictures with NSFW content, and therefore I will not be sharing the link. Ukraine has been keeping the details of its upcoming spring counteroffensive from its allies in an attempt to prevent the leaking of classified information that could affect the offensive. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has had no conversations with the White House about a massive leak of secret US intelligence papers. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. The Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation has claimed that it has uncovered several agents of Ukraine's defense intelligence who were allegedly preparing a series of terrorist attacks in Crimea. The prevented attacks would have targeted Sergei Aksionov, the Russian-appointed head of Crimea, Vladimir Konstantinov, the Russian-appointed Speaker of the Crimean Parliament, Yalta Mayor Yanina Pavlenko, and transport infrastructure facilities in Crimea. Russian proxy authorities imposed additional restrictions on civilians in the occupied territories and intensified counterintelligence efforts ahead of the anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. An oil depot is on fire in the village of Volna in Russia's Krasnodar Krai, not far from the Crimean Bridge. The fire allegedly started after a drone crashed into the facility. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. A joint investigation by Nordic journalists claims that Russian ships have visited the areas of explosions on the branches of the Russian Nord Stream gas pipeline at least 3 times, and one of them 5 days before the incident. After weeks of negotiations, the ambassadors of the European Union agreed upon a plan for joint procurement of ammunition for Ukraine. The White House predicts that the expected counteroffensive of Ukrainian troops will turn into carnage. The rate at which Russian forces are being killed or wounded in Ukraine has spiked in recent months, and the Ukrainian counteroffensive may face a similar increase in the number of casualties among Ukrainian soldiers. The first IRIS-T air defense system provided by Germany has so far intercepted over 60 Russian targets since being deployed in October 2022. A second IRIS-T has entered combat duty in April 2023. The United States is sending Ukraine about $300 million in military aid. Most notably, additional ammunition for HIMARS, 155mm howitzers, and 155mm artillery rounds. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. On April 28th and May 1st, 2023, Russia mounted air-launched cruise missile ALCM strikes against Ukraine. These were the first such strikes for 50 days, with the last prior strikes occurring on March 9th, 2023. The latest strikes were conducted by Russian long-range aviation strategic bombers, both Tu-95 and Tu-160 aircraft, likely using KH-101 and KH-555 ALCMs. Both strikes used smaller numbers of missiles than seen in previous attacks, which is likely due to Russian attempts to rebuild its ALCM stockpiles. The observed types of facilities damaged by the Russian strikes indicates a possible shift away from targeting Ukraine's electrical power network. Both recent strikes were likely focused on Ukraine's military, industrial, and logistical infrastructure. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed that the Russian Defense Industrial Base, DIB, is increasing its production of precision missiles for use against Ukraine. Shoigu likely seeks to deflect intensifying accusations that the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD, cannot provide sufficient ammunition to Russian forces. Russian reactions to a claimed strike against a vehicle carrying Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces Commander Major General Ihor Tansyura suggest Russian ultranationalists seek to frame any Russian operations as delaying potential Ukrainian counteroffensive actions. The Kremlin reportedly distributed a new manual instructing Russian state media on how to cover an upcoming potential Ukrainian counteroffensive that, if real, indicates the Kremlin is setting informational conditions both for an effective Russian defense and to mitigate shocks in the Russian information space from Ukrainian successes. UN member states, including key Russian partners like China, India, and Brazil, voted to adopt a resolution on April 26, acknowledging Russia as the aggressor in the war in Ukraine. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. Today during the night, the enemy made another massive attack on the territory of our country using Shahed 136-131 attack UAVs. 21 out of 26 of these drones were destroyed by our defenders. The probability of launching missile and airstrikes on the entire territory of Ukraine remains high. The enemy continues to focus its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka areas, where units of the Defense Forces of Ukraine repelled about 30 attacks during the day. The fiercest battles are fought for Bakhmut and Marinka. In the Liman direction, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions in the area of Bilohorivka with the aim of finding weak points in our defense. In the Bakhmut direction, the enemy continues to conduct offensive actions. Fighting continues in the city of Bakhmut. Attacks by the occupiers in the direction of the settlement of New York were unsuccessful. In the Avdiivka direction, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the Siverne area of Donetsk Oblast without success. In the Marinka direction, the enemy is trying to improve the tactical position. During the day, our defenders repelled numerous attacks in Marinka and Novomikhailivka districts. In order to at least somehow protect its personnel from the fire damage of the Defense Forces of Ukraine, the enemy will continue to cynically use the local population in the temporarily occupied territories. In the settlements of the Kakhovsky district, the Russian invaders placed their units between the private houses of local residents. And with that, the report is finished. Should you be interested in any articles I mentioned and want to read up on the details, you can find links to them in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.